I'm Cassidy, 24 years old. For 24 years, I lived as a ghost inside my own family. I rose at 4:45 every morning to polish silver, iron shirts, and prepare breakfast while my sister Sloane slept until 11 in her silk sheets on the second floor. My parents told me something I accepted as gospel for more than 2 decades. Some daughters are raised to shine. Some daughters are raised to stand in the shadows so others can shine brighter. You were born for the shadows, Cassidy. I never questioned it. Not once. Not until the groom's grandfather, a silver-haired man I had never met in my life, looked at my face during the rehearsal toast and dropped his wineglass on the marble floor. He pulled me into the coat room minutes later and asked a question that cracked my entire existence down the middle. Child, who told you that Julia Hartwell was your aunt? Before I take you deeper into this, if anything in my voice already feels familiar to you, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you truly want to hear how a single question at a wedding unraveled 24 years of lies. And if you're listening right now, drop a comment below telling me your city and the time where you are. I want to know who's walking this road with me tonight. Now let me take you back to the morning of Sloane's engagement gala, the day I believed would simply be another long shift in the life I had been assigned. We lived in a Tudor-style estate in Bronxville, New York, the kind of zip code where private school tuition started at $50,000 a year, and every driveway held at least one Range Rover. Our neighbors were cardiac surgeons, federal judges, heiresses to cosmetics fortunes. From the curb, the Ashford Vance household looked like a glossy page torn from Town and Country magazine. From the inside, it was a quiet cathedral built to worship one daughter and to erase the other. My bedroom was not really a bedroom. It was a converted pantry behind the kitchen. 7 feet by 9 feet, a single bare bulb, a cot that folded against the wall during the day so that caterers could store their warming trays there when we hosted events. The walls still smelled of cinnamon and old flour. There was no lock on the door, because, as my mother Valerie liked to say, with her practiced smile, girls like you have nothing worth locking away. Every morning at 4:45, the cooking timer I kept under my pillow would vibrate against my cheek. By 5:10, I would be upstairs in the kitchen, wiping down the Calicotta gold countertops, warming the cast iron, squeezing grapefruits into crystal glasses. The island my mother had flown in from a quarry outside Carrara stretched 14 feet long. I knew every gold vein in it. I had polished each one 1,000 times. My father, Gregory, came down at 6:30 sharp every morning, his Financial Times folded under his arm, his Patek Philippe catching the light from the chandelier. He would sit at the breakfast nook, snap the paper open, and speak to me without ever lifting his eyes. Is the coffee the right temperature, Cassidy? Yes, Mr. Vance. Is the egg yolk still soft? Yes, Mr. Vance. Is the house presentable for your mother's brunch? Yes, Mr. Vance. In 24 years, my father had never once called me by any name other than Cassidy, and he had never once called himself anything other than Mr. Vance in my presence. I was trained from before I could form full sentences to address both of my parents by their surnames, the way a maid addresses the people who sign her paycheck. Except I had never seen a paycheck. I had never seen a single dollar with my name attached to it. The thing that hurt more than the cold pantry floor or the raw knuckles from scrubbing grout was the way they talked about me when they thought I was not listening. Valerie on the phone with her sister, voice low and apologetic. Yes, we still have the other one. No, she's useful. No, she doesn't ask questions anymore. We trained that out of her years ago. Sloane's bedroom was on the second floor, a 300-square-foot suite with a private balcony that opened onto the rose garden. She had a canopy bed imported from France, a walk-in closet arranged by color, and a vanity lined with glass perfume bottles that cost more than most people's rent. She attended Chapin for middle school and Spence for high school. then Brown University on a family endowment seat that my grandfather had purchased in 1962. I attended no school at all. Valerie had told the one neighbor who ever asked that I suffered from a severe learning disability and had to be educated privately at home by a specialist. There was no specialist. There had never been a specialist. I taught myself to read, using cookbooks and the back labels of cleaning products. I learned arithmetic by measuring ingredients and calculating tip percentages on the receipts Valerie left on the counter. When Sloane turned 21, my father handed her the keys to a matte white Porsche Macan wrapped in a red bow. I did not have a driver's license. I did not have a passport. I did not have a birth certificate that I had ever been allowed to touch. Yours was damaged in a flood when the old farmhouse basement flooded, my mother had told me when I was 10 and brave enough to ask. The state said they cannot reissue it without proof of parentage, and the hospital you were born at shut down years ago. It's all very complicated. Darling, just leave it to me. I believed her. Of course I believed her. She was my mother. And children believe their mothers even when every instinct in their small bodies is screaming otherwise. Sloane carried a titanium American Express, the one with no spending limit, linked to my father's account from the week she turned 16. She bought Hermes scarves the way other girls buy coffee. I owned 4 items of clothing that were mine. 2 plain black dresses Valerie had ordered from a uniform catalog, a wool cardigan from a charity bin, and a pair of canvas shoes that my feet had outgrown 2 sizes ago. At dinner, 3 places were set at the dining table. Gregory at the head, Valerie on his right, Sloane on his left. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room with a serving cloth folded over my forearm, waiting to clear the plates between courses. Once, when I was 11, I asked Valerie very softly if I could sit down just for dessert. She looked at me the way you look at a stain. Cassidy, darling, the chairs are upholstered in silk velvet. We don't let the help sit on silk velvet. You understand, don't you? I understood. I understood so completely that I did not ask again for 13 more years. But somewhere deep inside the child I still was, a small ember refused to go out. A question kept whispering in the dark of the pantry at night. Why me? Why only me? What did I do before I could even walk that made them decide I deserved this? I did not have the answer. I would not have the answer for 24 years. But the answer was already on its way, wearing a grandfather's tuxedo and carrying a photograph in his inside pocket. Gregory called them the house covenants. He had written them on a cream-colored card in his own handwriting when I was 4 years old and had pinned it to the inside of the pantry door at eye level, so I would see it every single morning when I woke. Covenant 1. You will never sit at the dining table, the living room sofa, or any upholstered chair in the public rooms of this house. Covenant 2. You will never refer to Gregory Vance or Valerie Ashford Vance as father or mother. You will address us as Mr. Vance and Mrs. Vance at all times, including in private. Covenant 3. You will never discuss the arrangements of this household with anyone outside of it. Covenant 4. You will never attempt to leave the property without written permission, and you will never, under any circumstances, speak to a member of law enforcement without Mr. Vance present. The enforcement of these covenants lived in the second drawer of the butler's pantry, under a stack of linen napkins. A leather belt folded in half that Gregory had used exactly 3 times in my life. Each time was enough. The first time I was 6. I had hummed a song I heard on the radio while dusting the piano, and Valerie had heard me and decided I was putting on airs. My back was raw for a week. The second time I was 13. A neighbor's son had stopped me at the mailbox and asked if I wanted to join their church youth group, and I had hesitated a full 3 seconds before saying no. The neighbor's mother mentioned it to Valerie at the country club. The belt came out that night. The third time I was 17. I had saved $240 in small bills hidden inside a hollowed-out flour canister, money I had skimmed from grocery change over 2 years, and I had walked 6 miles down Midland Avenue before a state trooper pulled over and asked me where I was going. I told him I was going to my grandmother's house. I did not have a grandmother. The trooper drove me back to the estate because I did not have any identification and could not name the address I was heading to. Gregory thanked the trooper at the door with the warm, mildly embarrassed smile of a man whose special needs daughter had wandered off again. He tipped the trooper $50 for his trouble. Then he closed the door, walked me down the hallway, and locked me in the pantry for 4 days without food. On the 5th day, when he finally unlocked the door and crouched down to my level, he did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. That was part of what made him so frightening. "Cassidy," he said softly, "without documents, you do not exist. Without existence, you cannot be missed. Without being missed, no one will ever come looking. Do we understand each other?" I understood. I did not try again for 7 years. Sloane was not violent the way Gregory was violent. She was something colder. She was indifferent. To my sister, I was not a person she hated. I was a person she had never quite registered as being fully human. "Cassidy, bring up my laundry." "Cassidy, the driver is here." "Cassidy, I spilled something on the rug. Deal with it." When her friends from Brown came to the house during breaks, she introduced me with a small wave. "Oh, that's Cassidy. She's been with our family forever." No one ever asked what forever meant. No one ever asked why a 24-year-old woman in uniform was called by first name, while my sister's nannies over the years had all been called ma'am. I looked nothing like them. Gregory and Valerie were both pale and fair-haired, with the kind of thin Anglo-Saxon bone structure that my mother's family had cultivated across 6 generations of careful marriages. Sloane was a photocopy of them in miniature. My eyes were a deep gray blue, the color of a winter sea. My hair was almost black. My skin, when the sun touched it during the few minutes a day I spent taking out the trash, turned gold instead of pink. I had asked Valerie once, when I was 9, why I was so different. She had slapped me across the mouth so hard that I bit through my own lip. "We do not discuss appearances in this house," she said. "Ever." The blood from my lip stained the collar of my dress, and I spent that evening scrubbing it out with cold water and vinegar, my fingers numb, my jaw aching, and I never asked again. At 24, Sloane was engaged. She was marrying a man named Preston Kingsley, 30 years old, a junior partner at a white shoe law firm in Manhattan, the only son of Winston Kingsley, who owned a private equity firm worth an estimated $240 million. Preston had proposed to her on a yacht off the coast of Nantucket with a 5-carat emerald-cut diamond that his mother had selected. The Vances were delirious. This was not just a marriage. This was a transfusion. A direct injection of Kingsley money into the aging veins of the Ashford Vance fortune, which had been quietly bleeding out for almost a decade due to some very unwise investments my father refused to discuss. I heard them talking in the study the night the engagement was announced. Valerie's voice, low and greedy. "Winston Kingsley likes you, Gregory. He sees you as a peer. If we play this right, he brings you onto one of his boards within the year. And then, everything turns around." They did not yet know who else would be attending the gala. They did not know that Preston's paternal grandfather, a retired federal judge named Edmund Kingsley, had agreed to fly in from his estate in Virginia for the engagement party despite being 81 years old and in mild declining health. Edmund almost never traveled anymore, but he had a reason this time. A reason that had nothing to do with his grandson's fiancée and everything to do with an old unsolved disappearance that had haunted him for 2.5 decades. The gala invitations arrived 3 weeks before the event, embossed on heavy cotton stock from a stationer on Madison Avenue. I read through every single one as I addressed the envelopes by hand, because Valerie thought handwritten addresses looked more refined than printed labels. My fingers cramped. My handwriting had to match the sample card Valerie had prepared. Every envelope listed the Ashford Vance family as hosts. Every envelope named Sloane and Preston. Not a single envelope contained my name. Not as a sister of the bride, not as a relative, not even as a +1. I was not being invited to my own family's engagement gala. I was being staffed at it. Valerie had rented 3 additional caterers from a staffing agency for the evening, and she had told them quite plainly on the phone, in a voice I overheard through the kitchen vent, that the 4th server, the one named Cassidy, was technically a live-in employee rather than agency staff, but that they should treat her the same. "She will follow your lead," Valerie had said brightly. "She is very well trained." Well trained. Like a dog. Like a horse. Like a piece of property that has been broken into obedience over a long period of careful, methodical pressure. That night, I sat on the edge of my cot in the pantry and pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes until I saw stars. I did not cry. I had not cried since I was 12. Crying made Valerie angry and made Gregory impatient, and both of those things had consequences. So my body had simply stopped producing tears somewhere around my 13th birthday. But something was shifting inside me that night. Something slow and tectonic, like a continental plate that has been building pressure along a fault line for years and is finally beginning to move. I did not know what it was. I did not know that in 3 weeks a stranger would walk into the ballroom of the St. Regis and see my face and feel the same earthquake inside his own chest. I did not know that the name Cassidy was not the name I had been born with. I did not know that there was a woman named Julia Hartwell who had loved me once, and a man named Edmund Kingsley who had never stopped looking for the granddaughter he had lost. I only knew, sitting on that cot, that I could not spend another 24 years this way. Something in me was going to break. I prayed it would break outward this time instead of inward. I prayed so quietly that even God would have had to lean close to hear me. And somewhere, it turned out, someone was already listening. The engagement gala was held at the St. Regis Hotel on Fifth Avenue, in the Astor Ballroom, beneath ceilings painted with gilded clouds and hung with 5 crystal chandeliers the size of small cars. 300 guests were invited. The orchestra was imported from Vienna. The flowers, white peonies and ivory garden roses, had been flown in overnight from a grower in the Netherlands. Winston Kingsley had quietly covered the entire bill, a fact that Gregory pretended did not embarrass him. I arrived through the service entrance in the back alley, wearing the uniform Valerie had selected for me. A plain black dress with a white collar, a small white apron, flat black shoes. My hair was pulled back so tightly that my scalp ached. I was not permitted to wear makeup. I was not permitted to wear jewelry. I was not permitted to be noticed. The catering captain, a middle-aged man with kind brown eyes named Mr. Aguilar, looked at me for a long moment when I checked in at the service table. "You're the one who lives with the family," he said slowly. "Yes, sir." He did not say anything else, but he quietly assigned me to the least visible zone of the ballroom, the far corner near the string section, away from the family table. I think he understood something about me that I had not yet understood about myself. I was not just a server tonight. I was something the family wanted hidden. The guests began arriving at 7. Women in silk gowns by Oscar de la Renta and Carolina Herrera. Men in tuxedos with silk lapels. Senators, museum board members, 2 former attorneys general. The kind of crowd where every handshake was a transaction and every air kiss was a contract. I moved through them with my tray of champagne, invisible the way I had been trained to be. My eyes stayed on the floor. My shoulders stayed straight. I was not a person. I was a function. And then I felt the first pull. A prickle at the back of my neck. the kind an animal feels when it is being watched by something in the trees. I looked up. Across the ballroom, near one of the marble columns, an elderly man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo was standing completely still with a glass of red wine halfway to his mouth. He was staring at me. Not past me, not through me, at me. His face had lost all color. His free hand was gripping the sleeve of a woman beside him, his daughter-in-law. I would later learn, hard enough to wrinkle the fabric. I dropped my gaze and turned toward the bar, trying to remember how to breathe. When I looked back a minute later, he was gone. An hour into the gala, the toasts began. Winston Kingsley spoke first about his son. Gregory spoke second about his daughter. Valerie spoke third about the grace of two families becoming one. Then the microphone passed to the oldest member of the Kingsley family, the grandfather, Edmund. Edmund Kingsley walked to the microphone slowly, leaning on a cane. He was tall, thin, white-haired, with the kind of eyes that had spent 40 years weighing evidence from a judge's bench and did not easily forgive what they saw. He began his toast gracefully enough, praising Preston, welcoming Sloane into the family. Then he lifted his glass and said, "And to family, the real kind, the kind that does not let go of its own, no matter how long it takes to find them." His eyes moved across the room as he spoke, and they landed directly on me. His hand began to tremble. The wine glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. A small gasp rippled through the room. Servers rushed forward to clean up. Edmund apologized, waved them off, said something about an old man's tired hands. But I watched him closely, and I saw that he had not looked at the floor when he dropped the glass. He had kept looking at me. Within 10 minutes, he had crossed the ballroom. He stopped 3 feet from where I was refilling glasses at the bar and said, quietly enough that only I could hear, "Child, may I speak with you in private?" I froze. "Sir, I am working." "5 minutes," he said. "Please." There was something in his voice, a crack, a grief, that made it impossible to refuse. I glanced around. Valerie was across the room, laughing at something the senator's wife had said. Gregory was deep in conversation with Winston. I set my tray down on the bar and followed the old man through a side door into the coat room. The coat room was quiet. Rows of fur coats and cashmere wraps hung on numbered hangers. Edmund closed the door behind us and stood with his back against it, as if guarding our conversation from the outside world. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out an old photograph, creased along its folds, the colors slightly faded. He held it out to me with both hands. "Child," he said, his voice breaking. "Tell me who this is." I looked down at the photograph. It was a picture of a young woman, maybe 23 years old, sitting on a porch swing with a baby on her lap. The baby was perhaps 4 months old, with dark, fine hair and large gray-blue eyes. The woman was laughing at something just off camera. Her hair was nearly black. Her eyes were the exact shade of gray-blue. Her jawline, the curve of her mouth, the small mole on the left side of her chin, all of them were mine. My knees gave out slightly. I caught myself against the wall. "Who is this?" I whispered. Edmund swallowed. "That is my daughter, Julia Hartwell Kingsley. She was my only child from my first marriage. She kept her mother's name. The baby on her lap is Julia's daughter, my granddaughter. Her name was Cora Hartwell." I stared at the photograph. My mouth would not form any words. 24 years ago this coming November," Edmund continued. 24 years ago, Julia was driving home from a pediatric appointment in Rochester with Cora in the back seat. She was hit by a drunk driver on a stretch of Route 90. Julia died at the scene. The car flipped into a ravine. When the state police arrived, they found Julia, but they did not find Cora. The infant's car seat was missing. The investigators concluded that either the baby had been thrown from the car and taken by a predator, or that someone had arrived at the scene before the police and removed the infant from the wreckage. We never found out which. The case was never closed, but it went cold within a year. Edmund's eyes were full now. Child. My daughter's eyes were that color. My daughter's mother had that same cleft in her chin. You are wearing my daughter's face. I cannot explain it. I have spent 24 years searching for any trace of Cora. I hired 3 private firms. I kept the FBI file warm with personal calls for 2 decades. I never told anyone in this family tonight why I agreed to come. Not even Preston, not even Winston. But my housekeeper saw an article 3 months ago in a local New York paper about the Ashford Vance engagement, and she pointed out the young woman in the background of one of the photographs. The server in the black dress. She said to me, "Mr. Edmund, that girl looks like Miss Julia." I did not believe her until I walked into that ballroom tonight. I did not have words. I did not have tears. I had a kind of ringing in my ears, as if a tuning fork had been struck inside my skull. "I do not know who I am," I whispered. Edmund stepped closer. "Child, who told you that Julia Hartwell was your aunt?" I had never heard that name before in my life. I told him so, my voice barely audible. No one has ever told me anything about an aunt. I have been told nothing about where I come from. I have been told only that I am the Vance's daughter, and that I am the one who was born to serve. Edmund's jaw hardened. Something very old and very dangerous moved behind his face. The federal judge was coming back online. He pulled out a small plastic cotton swab from a sealed pouch in his pocket. It was a chain of custody DNA kit, the kind used in federal investigations. He had come to this gala prepared. "If you consent," he said, "I would like to swab the inside of your cheek right now. I have a private lab that can run a grand paternity comparison against my existing sample within 48 hours. If you are not Cora, I will personally apologize to you and to your family, and you will never see me again. But if you are..." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. I looked over my shoulder at the closed door, behind which my entire life was still playing out as a quiet lie. I thought of the pantry. I thought of the covenants on the door. I thought of Valerie's hand across my mouth when I was 9. I opened my mouth. Edmund swabbed the inside of my cheek gently. He sealed the swab in the evidence envelope, initialed the seal with a silver pen, and placed it back inside his jacket. Then he pressed a small folded card into my hand. "My private cell number," he said. "Do not call from any phone that can be traced back to that house. If they realize what you have done before the results come back, I do not know what they will do to you, and I would not forgive myself if something happened to you in the next 48 hours. Be careful tonight, child. Be very careful." I nodded. I could not speak. He opened the door and walked away without looking back. I stood alone in the coat room for almost a full minute before I could remember how to pick up a tray. When I finally returned to the ballroom floor, Valerie was watching me from across the room, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips, and her eyes were not warm. Her eyes were calculating. Her eyes, for the first time in my 24 years, looked afraid. The 48 hours after the gala were the longest hours of my life. I went home with the family in the Escalade at 2 in the morning, and I prepared their herbal tea, and I laid out Valerie's silk robe, and I turned down Sloane's bed the way I did every night. Nothing in my outward behavior changed. Inside, I was a house on fire. I kept waiting for Valerie to corner me. She did not at first. But I felt her watching. She watched me pour coffee the next morning, and she watched me iron Sloane's blouse, and she watched me unload the dishwasher, and her watching had a different quality now. It was the watching of someone trying to decide whether to act. On the second morning, Gregory called me into his study before breakfast. That alone was unusual. He had not called me into his study more than 3 times in my life, and each time had ended with the belt. "Close the door, Cassidy. Sit." There was no chair for me to sit in. I understood this was a test. I remained standing. He stared at me over the top of his reading glasses for a long moment. Then he said, "I noticed that you were absent from the ballroom floor for approximately 11 minutes during the toasts last night. Is there anything you would like to tell me about that?" My pulse doubled in my throat. I had not realized he had been timing me. "I felt unwell, Mr. Vance." I went to the service bathroom. He watched me for another long beat. "Cassidy," he said finally, "if I were to discover that you had spoken to a guest last night about anything, the consequences would be severe. I need you to understand that." "I understand, Mr. Vance." He nodded once, slowly. "You may go." I went. For the rest of that day, I moved through the house in a state of suspended animation. I cooked, I cleaned, I held my phone in my apron pocket and did not let myself look at it. Edmund had said 48 hours. 48 hours would end at approximately 9 in the evening on the third day. At 8:47 p.m. on the third day, while I was hand-washing Valerie's cashmere sweaters in the laundry room, my phone vibrated against my thigh. I locked the door quietly and opened the message. "Results are in. Can you meet tomorrow morning at 9? There is a small diner on Pondfield Road called the Blue Lantern. Come in whatever you can leave the house wearing. A car will be waiting in the back. E.K." I typed back 3 letters. Yes. The next morning, I told Valerie I needed to walk to the pharmacy to pick up her migraine medication. She waved me off without looking up. I walked the 11 blocks to the Blue Lantern. Edmund was already seated in a booth at the back, his hands folded around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. He stood when he saw me. His eyes were red and did not look like they had slept in 2 days. He gestured for me to sit across from him, and then without speaking, he slid a manila folder across the table. The top page of the folder was a genetic analysis from a private forensics laboratory in Maryland. I scanned past the technical terminology, the long strings of numbers, the probability models I did not yet know how to read. Then, my eyes caught the line at the bottom, the one highlighted in yellow marker. Grand paternity probability, 99.994%. Conclusion: the tested sample labeled Subject 1 is the biological grandchild of Edmund Kingsley. I read the sentence 4 times. The words did not rearrange themselves no matter how many times I looked. "Cora," Edmund said softly, using the name out loud for the first time. "That is your name. Your full legal name at birth was Cora Julia Hartwell Kingsley. You were born on the 3rd of February, 24 years ago, at Strong Memorial Hospital in Rochester, New York. Your mother Julia was 26 when she had you. She had been married for less than a year to a man named Matthew Hartwell, who died of a congenital heart defect when you were 6 weeks old. She raised you alone from the time you were an infant until the night of the accident." He paused. "She loved you, Cora. I have letters. I have videos. I have every piece of evidence a grandfather could wish to share with a granddaughter he thought he had lost." The ringing in my ears was back. The diner around me had gone silent, as if someone had lowered a heavy velvet curtain between me and the world. "But Cora," Edmund said, his voice hardening, "I have more than a DNA result. I have been very busy these past 2 days. My former law clerk now works for the United States Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York. I sent her the DNA results, and I also sent her a photograph of you, and I sent her the name of the family that has been claiming to raise you. Do you know what she found within 6 hours? Valerie Ashford was Julia's college roommate at Vassar. They graduated the same year. They stayed in sporadic contact for a decade after. Valerie was, in fact, one of the last people Julia called on the day she died, because Julia had mentioned in an earlier conversation that week that Valerie and Gregory were having difficulty conceiving a second child. Valerie went to the hospital morgue and identified Julia's body as a family friend the next morning, because Edmund and his wife were on a flight back from London and had not yet arrived. She was at the accident site before law enforcement fully secured the scene. Do you understand what I am saying to you, Cora? I felt the blood leave my face. She took me. She took you, Edmund said. We cannot prove it yet in a courtroom. But the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. She identified the body. She had access to the scene. Your car seat and infant bag were never recovered. She and Gregory appeared 7 months later, with a newly adopted daughter whose paperwork, we have now confirmed, was forged through a corrupt private adoption attorney in New Jersey, who was later disbarred for similar offenses. The FBI reopened your case officially yesterday afternoon. Agents are already on the Vance property conducting preliminary surveillance. You are no longer going back to that house alone, Cora. Not today, not ever. I am taking you to my attorney's office right now. I left the diner in Edmund's town car. I never returned to the Ashford Vance estate, not as its servant, not as their daughter. I spent the next 3 days at Edmund's attorney's office in Manhattan, giving a formal statement, sitting for photographs, speaking to 2 FBI agents, a victim's advocate, and a forensic psychologist who specialized in recovered kidnapping survivors. I learned that my mother, Julia, had been the valedictorian of her high school class, a classically trained cellist, a pediatric nurse in training when she met my father. I learned that my father, Matthew Hartwell, had been an architect who had designed 3 LEED-certified schools in Western New York before his heart gave out at the age of 29. I learned that I had 2 living uncles on my father's side, both of whom had been told they had a niece who had died as an infant, and who were, as of that week, being told the truth. I learned that Edmund's wife, Margaret Kingsley, my step-grandmother, had collapsed in tears when Edmund had called her from the hotel the night of the gala. She had been the first person in the family, other than Edmund himself, to be told. I learned that there existed a trust. Julia, before she died, had inherited a portion of the Hartwell estate when her husband Matthew passed. She had placed it entirely in a trust for her infant daughter, to be released on the daughter's 25th birthday or upon proof of guardianship. The trust had been growing, untouched, managed by a Rochester bank for 24 years. I did not ask what it was worth. I was not ready to ask. On the 4th morning, Edmund sat across from me in the attorney's conference room and he said, "Cora, there is something else you need to decide. The FBI is prepared to make arrests. They have enough for a federal kidnapping charge, a fraud charge, 2 forgery charges. And we believe, based on what you described of the pantry, the covenants card, the belt, the 4 days without food, they have enough for multiple counts of child abuse and neglect, including likely qualifying charges under federal trafficking statutes because they benefited financially from your unpaid labor for over a decade after you became a legal minor worker. They will arrest Gregory and Valerie Ashford Vance. There is no question of that. But the timing is yours." He paused. "You have been silenced for 24 years. If you want to be present when they are arrested, if you want to look them in the eyes when their world ends, that is your right. I have spoken to the agents. They are willing to coordinate." I thought about the pantry door. I thought about the leather belt in the second drawer. I thought about Valerie's slap across my mouth when I was 9 years old, and Gregory's voice the day he locked me in for 4 days, without raising it once. I thought about 24 years of being told I was a shadow, and I said to Edmund, very quietly, "I want them to see my face. I want them to see it in daylight. I want them to understand that the shadow they made is the one that finally blocked out their sun." Edmund looked at me for a long moment, and something old and proud and grieving moved across his face. "Your mother," he said, "would be very proud of you." Before I take you into the confrontation, I want you to understand something. For 24 years, I had been told that if I ever spoke up, no one would believe me. I had been told that without documents, I did not exist, and without existence, I could not be heard. I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where someone in your family, someone who was supposed to protect you, told you that your voice did not matter? If you have, I need you to do me one favor tonight. Drop a comment below and write the words, "My voice matters." Not for me, for you. I need you to read those words back to yourself in your own handwriting. And if this story is helping you remember something you have been trying not to remember, please like and subscribe, because what comes next is the part I need you to stay for. This is the part where the shadow finally speaks. We planned the confrontation for the following Saturday. Edmund's attorney, working with federal investigators, arranged an invitation from Winston Kingsley, Preston's father, to host the Ashford Vances at his estate in Bedford for a small lunch to discuss, ostensibly, a business partnership. Gregory was beside himself. A direct invitation from Winston was exactly what he had been angling for since the engagement was announced. He accepted within 10 minutes. He did not know that Winston had been briefed the previous evening on exactly who his future in-laws actually were. Winston had been, according to Edmund, physically ill when he heard. He had then agreed without hesitation to host the meeting. Sloane and Preston were not told. Preston would have refused to participate if he had known. Edmund wanted the confrontation clean, legally airtight, without the emotional contamination of his grandson learning the truth in real time. On Saturday morning, Gregory, Valerie, and Sloane drove up to Bedford in the Escalade. I rode up separately in a car driven by a federal marshal, arriving 20 minutes before them. I was placed in a small sitting room adjacent to the main parlor, a room with French doors I could open when the timing was right. Edmund, Winston, and 2 FBI special agents waited in the parlor. A third agent waited with me. The Vances were shown in by a butler and seated on the pale blue silk sofa I had been trained for 24 years never to touch. I watched through a crack in the French doors as Valerie arranged her skirt and smiled her sharpest social smile. Gregory shook Winston's hand and glanced around the parlor with the barely concealed hunger of a man who had been waiting 20 years for this exact room. Sloane sat beside her mother, already annoyed that she had been made to come instead of going to brunch with her bridesmaids. Winston offered them tea. Edmund made small talk about the upcoming wedding. Then Edmund leaned forward slowly in his wingback chair and said, "Gregory, Valerie, before we discuss business, there is a personal matter I need to raise. A delicate matter. You see, 24 years ago this coming November, my daughter Julia Hartwell was killed in a car accident. Her infant daughter Cora disappeared from the scene and was never found." I watched the color drain from Valerie's face in slow motion, like watching paint bleed out of a canvas. Gregory sat very still. His hand, resting on his knee, did not move, but I could see the tendons in his wrist go white. "I have spent 24 years looking for my granddaughter," Edmund continued. "And 2 weeks ago, at Sloane and Preston's engagement gala, I found her." Valerie's teacup trembled against its saucer. "I don't," she began. "I don't understand what you are saying, Edmund." "We have had DNA tests run," Edmund said calmly. "We have had forensic handwriting analysis done on adoption paperwork. We have had phone records subpoenaed from the week of November 11th through the 18th of that year. We have had hospital records. We have had bank records for the months of December and January. I want you to understand that we have everything. Everything." Gregory spoke for the first time. His voice was careful, lawyerly. "Edmund, if you are accusing us of something, I think we should involve counsel before continuing this conversation." "I agree," Edmund said. "That is why I have arranged for counsel to join us." He glanced at the doorway. The two FBI special agents stepped forward from the hallway where they had been standing unseen. Gregory Vance, Valerie Ashford Vance. I am Special Agent Patricia Renner with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are both under arrest for the kidnapping of Cora Julia Hartwell Kingsley on November 17th of that year, for forgery of federal adoption documents, for fraudulent statements to law enforcement, for over 2 decades of continuing concealment, and for multiple counts of abuse, neglect, and involuntary servitude of the aforementioned victim. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Sloane let out a high, thin scream. Valerie dropped her teacup entirely. Gregory rose to his feet and took a single step toward the door before the second agent stepped into his path. And that was when I opened the French doors and walked into the room. I walked slowly. I did not wear the black dress and white apron. I wore a simple ivory blouse and gray trousers that Edmund's wife Margaret had bought for me 3 days earlier at a boutique on Madison Avenue. My hair was loose. My face was clean. I looked, for the first time in my life, like a person who belonged in a parlor instead of serving in one. Valerie saw me and began to sob. "Cassidy," she wailed. "Cassidy, please. They are confused. Tell them. Tell them you are our daughter." I stopped in the center of the room. I looked at her for a long moment. "My name is not Cassidy," I said. "My name is Cora, and I am not your daughter. I never was." Gregory had gone the color of old paper. He tried to speak. I did not let him. "Mr. Vance," I said, "I want you to know that I remember every single one of the 4 days you locked me in the pantry without food. I remember the belt in the second drawer. I remember the covenants card on the door. I remember your voice the night you told me that without papers I did not exist. I remember all of it. And I want you to know something else. I have documents now. I have a birth certificate. I have a passport application in process. I have a name my mother gave me. I exist. I have always existed. You did not erase me. You only hid me. And now, I am found." Agent Renner stepped forward with the handcuffs. Sloane was still screaming. Valerie had collapsed forward onto her knees on the silk carpet and was reaching toward me, and I did not flinch, but I also did not move closer. As the agents led Gregory toward the door in handcuffs, he turned his head and looked at me one last time. There was no remorse in his face. There was only calculation, the same look I had seen on him my entire childhood. A man trying to figure out which lever to pull next. "Cassidy," he said softly. "Cora," I corrected him. "My name is Cora Hartwell Kingsley." "Cora," he said, his voice dropping to that quiet register that used to make my stomach clench. "You know you owe us something. We fed you. We housed you. We clothed you. Whatever you think happened, you are still alive because of us." And something inside me, something that had been a small ember burning in the pantry for 24 years, finally became a flame. "Mr. Vance," I said, "I am alive despite you. Not because of you. You did not feed me out of kindness. You fed me because a dead servant is harder to hide than a living one. You did not house me. You imprisoned me. You did not clothe me. You uniformed me. And you do not get to walk out of this room carrying any piece of my story with you, as if it were payment for a debt I never owed." The agents led him out. Valerie followed, sobbing, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face. Sloane sat on the silk sofa with both hands pressed over her mouth, her engagement ring catching the afternoon light, and she did not say a single word to me as I walked past her. She would try to contact me 11 months later. I would not answer. That is a decision I stand by to this day. The federal indictment came down 3 weeks later. Kidnapping of a minor under federal statutes, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, child abuse under the Violence Against Children Act, and a federal civil rights charge based on the unpaid domestic labor. The case was, according to the prosecuting attorney, one of the most comprehensively documented she had encountered in 12 years of work. My testimony took 2 full days. I spoke slowly. I did not cry. I described the pantry. I described the covenants card. I described the belt. I described the night I was 17 and the state trooper drove me home. I described the slap when I was 9. I described 24 years of being called Cassidy when my name was Cora. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Gregory Ashford Vance was convicted on every count and sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. He will be 79 when he is eligible for parole. Valerie Ashford Vance was convicted on every count except the original kidnapping, for which the jury found the evidence just short of beyond reasonable doubt. She was sentenced to 15 years. Sloane Ashford Vance was not charged. She had been 4 years old when the kidnapping occurred. She claimed, credibly, that she had grown up believing I was her adopted sister. The prosecutor did not pursue charges against her, but her engagement to Preston Kingsley ended 2 days after the arrest. Preston, once he learned the full truth, could not look at her without seeing his own cousin, me, in the background of every childhood memory she had ever shared with him. The Kingsley family, I was told, asked for the ring back. The Ashford Vance estate was seized by federal authorities as the fruit of ongoing criminal conduct. Sloane, at 28 years old, moved into a studio apartment in Queens and began looking for work for the first time in her life. The trust that my mother Julia had set up for me before she died turned out to be valued, on the day it was released into my name, at $14,200,000. I stared at the number on the statement for a very long time. It did not feel like money. It felt like the weight of a life my mother had tried to give me, carried across 24 years by strangers in suits in a bank in Rochester, waiting for me to finally walk in the door. I did not spend any of it for the first 6 months. I let it sit. I could not yet make decisions that large. What I did do was move into my grandparents' guest cottage on their estate in Virginia. It was a small stone building at the edge of a pond, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen I did not have to cook in for anyone, and a reading chair by a window that looked out over a pasture where 2 old horses grazed in the afternoons. Margaret, my step-grandmother, taught me how to cook meals for myself, not as labor, but as a form of love. I had never in my life cooked a meal that I was allowed to eat at the same table as the person who had cooked it with me. The first night I did, sitting across from Margaret over a simple roasted chicken and potatoes, I finally cried. I cried for almost an hour. She did not try to stop me. She just held my hand across the table until I was finished. I began therapy that same week. My therapist was a woman named Dr. Naomi Peterson, who specialized in long-term captivity and identity recovery. The work was slower than I expected. I had assumed that once I knew the truth, once the Vances were in prison, once I had a real name and a real family, everything inside me would heal. It did not work that way. I had panic attacks in grocery stores because I did not know how to choose food for myself. I had nightmares in which Valerie appeared at the foot of my bed, holding the covenants card. I woke up at 4:45 in the morning for 8 straight months before my body finally learned it was allowed to sleep until 7. I caught myself, at dinner parties Edmund and Margaret hosted, automatically standing up to clear other people's plates. Margaret would gently press my arm and whisper, "Cora, you sit. The staff has this. Cora, you sit." I had to hear that sentence approximately 400 times before my body began to believe it. I also began to search for the rest of my family. My father's brothers, my paternal uncles, lived in Buffalo and Syracuse, and both of them drove down to Virginia within a month of learning the truth. They brought photographs. My father as a boy, holding a model airplane. My father at his wedding to my mother, looking at her as if he could not believe his luck. My father holding me as a newborn, his hands so careful, so reverent that the photograph almost felt like a prayer. I had never known a single thing about my father before that afternoon. By the end of that visit, I knew that he had loved cold water swimming and classic jazz, and that he had built me a wooden crib by hand in the weeks before I was born. The crib was still in my Uncle Daniel's attic. He brought it down to Virginia for me 2 months later, just in case, he said, I ever needed it. I want to say something here about Sloan. 11 months after the arrests, Sloan sent me a long handwritten letter through Edmund's attorney. I read it once, and then I put it in a drawer, and I have not opened it since. I do not know yet if I will. The letter, from what I remember, contained a great many apologies and a great many requests. It contained a request for me to speak to her therapist about how she had not known and had not suspected and had not meant to participate. It contained a request for some portion of the Ashford Vance belongings that had been seized, a piece of jewelry that had belonged to her late grandmother that she claimed had sentimental value. It contained, near the end, a quiet suggestion that perhaps, when she had rebuilt her life and I had rebuilt mine, we might try to rebuild something between us, because after all, we had grown up in the same house. Dr. Peterson and I spent several sessions on that letter. She did not tell me whether to respond or not. She asked me a question instead. Cora, she said, if Sloan had known, when you were 12 years old and sleeping in a pantry, that you were not in fact her adopted sister, but a human being her parents had stolen from another family, what do you think she would have done? I sat with that question for a long time. I thought about Sloan at 15, stepping over me while I scrubbed the kitchen floor, without saying a word. I thought about Sloan at 20, asking me to iron her dress for her sorority formal as if I were an appliance. I thought about Sloan at 24, introducing me to her friends as the girl who had been with the family forever. And I realized something important. Knowing the truth would not have made Sloan kinder. It would have made her more careful. She would have been kinder to me only in front of witnesses. She would have protected the secret. That was who she was. That was who she had been raised to be. I did not owe her a response. I still do not. I may never. I enrolled at Georgetown University the following September at the age of 25. The admissions office worked with a nonprofit that helps survivors of long-term captivity and abuse navigate the educational system. My high school equivalency took me 4 months. My first semester at Georgetown took me 4 months to stop hyperventilating every time I had to speak in a classroom. But by the end of my second year, I was on the dean's list. I am studying public policy with a concentration in child welfare law. I am going to use what happened to me. I am going to make sure that the next Cora, the next child who is sleeping in the next pantry in the next Bronxville estate, has a better chance of being found than I did. I have started a small nonprofit, funded through a portion of my mother's trust, called the Lantern Project, after the name of the diner where Edmund first handed me my DNA results. The Lantern Project provides forensic DNA testing and legal services, at no cost, to adults who suspect that their stated identities or adoption histories may not be what they were told. In our first year, we reunited 2 people with their biological families. One of them was a woman in her 50s who had been sold as an infant through the same network of forged attorneys that had once laundered me. She called me a month after we found her birth mother, and she said, Cora, thank you for not letting your story stop with you. I keep that voicemail on my phone. I listen to it when the bad days come back. The bad days still come. I want to be honest about that. On the hard mornings, when the dreams are bad and my body wants to wake at 4:45 and start scrubbing a floor that is no longer mine to scrub, I sit in the reading chair by the window, and I take out the letter my mother wrote me. Edmund found it in a storage unit 3 months after I moved to Virginia, tucked inside a leather journal my mother had kept during the first months of my life. The letter was dated the day before she died. It was folded inside a sealed envelope with my name on it. Cora, in her careful pediatric nurse's handwriting. My sweet Cora, the letter begins. You are 4 months old today. You cannot yet hold up your own head, but you can hold up the whole world for me. I wanted to write this down in case one day when you are older, you ever forget who you are. You are not what anyone else decides you are. You are not a role. You are not a function. You are not small. You are the daughter of a woman who loved you before you were born and will love you after she is gone, because that is what mothers do. They love through time, through distance, through silence. If you are ever in a room where no one sees you, remember that I saw you first. I saw you before you had eyes to see back. I saw you and I loved you, and I knew you were enough. All my love, forever. Mom, I read that letter every morning. I read it out loud. Some days I barely get through the first line. Some days I get through the whole thing without my voice breaking. Both of those kinds of days are allowed. Both of those kinds of days are mine. For 24 years I was told I was born to serve. For 24 years I believed it. Then a stranger at a wedding looked at my face and recognized a love I had never known had existed for me. Then a photograph broke a lie that had been built brick by brick around me for my entire life. Then a single sentence from a judge with 81 years of experience became the crack through which the light finally reached me. I am still learning to live inside that light. I am still learning that I am allowed to sit at the table, that I am allowed to eat the food I cooked, that I am allowed to be tired and rest. I am still learning to answer to my real name without flinching. But I am learning. Every day, I am learning. And if any part of this story has reached you because you are still sitting in your own pantry, still answering to a name that does not feel like yours, still waiting for someone to see you, I want you to hear me say this one thing. You were not born to serve. You were not born to disappear. You were born, the same way every child is born, into a love that is yours by birthright, even if the people around you have hidden it from you. The light is already looking for you. Sometimes it just takes a little longer to arrive. Thank you for staying with me until the end of Cora's story. While some details of this story have been adapted for narrative purposes, thousands of children every year are misidentified, wrongfully adopted, or held in situations of modern domestic servitude within homes that appear respectable from the outside. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe, and consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear that their real name, matters. More stories about reclaiming truth, identity, and love are waiting in the description below. Thank you for listening.